Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Eden Road podcast, where on today's show, we're actually going to be talking about something different. Obviously, as everyone knows, it's Euro 2024 at the moment. England have played 2 games so far in the group stage. We're going to have a little chat about them, talk a little bit about Denmark too, and the tournament just in general, how it's been. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, I hope. Maybe not as much fun as I anticipated before the Euro started, considering the results that England have had and the performances that we've put across. But nonetheless, we're still going to talk about it. Joining me today, Craig and Dan. Craig, how are we, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Enjoying this warm weather.
Good stuff, good stuff. Dan, how are we?
Yeah, all good. Been on my summer holidays.
Good stuff, good stuff. I have to apologise as well. Dan and I are suffering quite badly from hay fever at the moment. I think the pollen has really just started to kick in, which makes mornings and most of the day, to be fair, pretty miserable. But I've taken my antihistamine, so if I'm a little bit coarse or you hear me sniffling in the background, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can just look at us suffering, which is quite nice. Yeah, we apologise for that, and hopefully it'll be fine by the end of the podcast. Just before we get going, guys, remember to drop a comment down below, subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels, and also give us a follow on our socials. That's at the Eden Road on Twitter and at Eden Road Pod on Instagram. Right, boys, I thought we'd talk about the Euros in general at first, and then we can kind of move on to England. So, Craig, what have you made of it so far? Good tournament?
I've actually found it quite entertaining. There's been a couple of dull games, and unfortunately, England have been involved in both of them. There's been a couple of dull games, but even the ones like France-Portugal last night finished 0-0, but I still found it incredibly entertaining to watch. There's lots of good football on show, and it's incredible the amount of fans that we're seeing in like shirts and things like that, because that Ukraine end was just yellow yesterday. The Netherlands end was just orange. The Denmark end was red, and I'm enjoying seeing the fans coming together and all the videos. It's just brilliant.
Are you able to, when it's the 2 p.m, 5 p.m, 8 p.m, are you sticking the 2 p.ms on in the background whilst you're working from home, or no?
I am indeed, mate. The telly is there. The telly is there, so it gets luckily it gets pulled out, it gets twisted, and I can just sit here and watch them work at the same time.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Dan, who's impressed you the most so far at the tournament?
I think, obviously, that first game from Germany against Scotland, I was just very unsure whether Germany are very, very good or whether Scotland were just absolutely terrible on the opening night. But obviously, they kicked off very well. I thought they didn't look quite as good against Hungary, but in the end, they still got the job done and they still look pretty good. So I think they're always going to be a contender at home. Obviously, I backed France to go far, even though their game last night, they probably should have lost it because I think some English refereeing again got in the way. And then obviously I think Spain have done well. I think if you look at Spain's 2 fixtures, Croatia and Italy, and obviously they've got 6 points from those, they could have easily slipped up in those games and they've looked quite good. So I think they're someone who maybe wasn't one of the immediate favourites at the beginning who do look quite good. And I like Portugal's squad as well. Obviously, I know they only kind of limped over the line and they haven't played their second game yet, but I think they've got a very good overall squad. So I think those are the contenders. And if you look at all the contenders, we're probably the most underwhelming of all of them from our performances so far.
Speaking, you're going to say about contenders, a team that's really impressed me who aren't contenders are Austria.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. Austria, they lost 1-0 to France due to their own goal, but they very much held their own against France and then just wiped the floor with Poland yesterday. They were fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's funny I was watching the Austria game yesterday. It's funny watching them, and I know that there was quite a bit of hype around Ralf Rangnick and his style of football and how he's managed to instill it within the Austria side before the tournament came around. And I think there were quite a few people backing them as dark horses, but obviously I don't watch many Austria games before then. And the first 2 games, it was so clear to see the patterns of play and how Rangnick wants them to play. When you look at England, it's just a little bit all over the gaff. But yeah, no, you're right. I think Spain, Dan, have impressed me quite a bit. They peppered Italy. They probably should have won more than 1-0 and comfortably got over the line against Croatia. So Yeah, I do think you're right though, Craig. I think Austria might get quite far in this tournament, especially from just how they played yesterday as well. They got some good players. Baumgartner looks a really good player. Really like him.
What's crazy for me, just because we haven't noted it down, and I want to bring it up, is the amount of own goals that we've seen in this tournament. I think it's crazy the number of own goals that we've seen in this tournament so far.
And long range goals. There's been loads of worldies.
Look, it's either worldies or own goals. Worldies or own goals, isn't it?
Yeah, let's talk a bit about Denmark. I want to talk about Thomas Frank first because he has been. I don't know if you boys have watched any of the BBC coverage or just tuned in when he's been on punditry, but I've seen the wider reaction to it, and he is putting sort of the other pundits to shame. I've seen a lot of tweets about Rio Ferdinand and Micah Richards and some of the other people that they have on their programs, and a lot of love being given to Thomas Frank. So what have you boys made of? I don't know. Have you guys watched any of it?
Yeah.
Go on, Greg.
You've probably seen more than me.
So because I managed to have basically every game on, and when he's on it, he is just phenomenal. He brings a totally different view to what the other people bring. So you're talking about Wayne Rooney that's been on there, Micah Richards, Rio Ferdinand, as you just mentioned, players that have been on there, but he brings a totally different viewpoint because you've got to remember that the Thomas Frank wasn't a player. He didn't play in these competitions, but as a managerial perspective, he seems to bring that something different, and he just has that freshness. He has a bit of humor with him as well, and I think that he actually says these as they are, but also I'm sure we'll move on to it as well. The post England, because obviously he was part of the studio for Denmark England, and post that game, all of them were extremely honest. But Thomas Frank has been phenomenal. He's so refreshing to watch.
I was watching a bit of Thomas Frank on the telly with my dad around, and he was like, he was just watching it. My dad doesn't like football, and he was like, when Thomas Frank speaks, you can really see the other pundits listening to him, and I feel like he just can't. He really is that. If he's speaking, if he's someone that's speaking, you do want to listen. And I think you're right. He has been really refreshing.
I think you get that with managers, don't you? Like on Sky Sports, even like when Gary O'Neill's been on, and when any of them have done those like tactical bits, I think everyone finds it very fascinating. Unfortunately, I've been in Sweden for most of the Euros, and I was just listening to Swedish commentary.
I thought you said some of all of these.
But no, it's definitely a big get for the BBC. I can't remember at any point in an international tournament if they've got a current Premier League manager on their punditry team. So it's been really good. In terms of Denmark, we haven't really seen too much of the Brentford players on display for the national team. We got Zanka, Jensen, Norgard, and Damsgaard. I don't really expect Zanka to feature too much unless their centre back partnership gets some sort of injury. But I think they've got another centre half on the bench anyway. Damsgaard and Norgard came on against England, but I don't think we've seen Jensen yet.
No,
I think
I'm right. Norgard in the first game came on.
And I think Norgard's a bit unlucky because Højbjerg looks like he's having a really good tournament, and I feel like that's the position that he's going up against in terms of the out and out six for Denmark. But yeah, do we expect to see any more of them? I'm a little bit disappointed for Jensen because I know his season kind of tapered off a little bit with Brentford, but in terms of what he can offer, I was watching Denmark yesterday, and obviously I got my Brentford hat on, so I'm a little bit biased, but I would like to see more of those two, Craig, Jensen and Damsgaard. I know it's going to be difficult for Norgard.
Well, we did see a bit of Damsgaard as well against England. Yeah. And he had that effort, which I think Pickford saved it quite comfortably in the end. But in my head, okay, if he scores his last goal 4 years ago against England, and then his next goal is against England again. Yeah, I do think that when they've come on, I thought Norgard did really well. He put himself about in that midfield with Jude and Trent for some reason, with Declan Rice as well. I think he did really well when he came on against England. You've got to also keep in mind that the Jensen position that we're talking about, where Norgard is going up against Højbjerg, Jensen's going up against Christian Eriksen.
Yeah.
And he also is having a fantastic tournament, as is Højbjerg. So it's very difficult to say whether or not we're going to see a lot of Jensen because of how well Christian Eriksen is doing. So I would like to see more of them. When I have seen them, again, maybe it's a biased view, as you've just said, but I think that they have done well. They've slotted in nicely. Damsgaard's creating chances. We've seen the way he does it with Brentford, and Norgaard's just always there, isn't he? He's always there. And I would like to see more of all of them. But with the way that Denmark are going and the talent they've got in that midfield, it's difficult to see where one of those three in midfield are going to slot in. But, time will tell, and an opportunity will come for them.
Yeah, for sure. What are your thoughts, Dan, going into an England-Denmark game? Because I'm always a bit conflicted when I see Brentford players coming up against England players. I remember chatting to, I think it was Craig, when we played Iceland and the Volder. I still don't know his surname. Voldemarsson, yeah, and he was playing, and I saw the Brentford Twitter account post clean sheet for Voldemarsson at Wembley. And on the one hand, you're like, yeah, you're happy for him, but on the other hand, it's like, fuck off, it's England. How do you feel when you go into, and it's basically just an England-Denmark game, because it's the only scenario where we're going to have Brentford players and England players playing against each other.
Yeah, well, it makes it a lot easier when none of the Denmark players who are starting are Brentford players. Of course, I want the Brentford players to go away and do well. I mean, the only one we've really seen is probably Strakosha in goal for Albania, the one we've really seen play regularly, and he's done okay. I mean, I've always said Denmark are kind of like my second national team. If England went out, I'd want Denmark to go as far as possible. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think England and Denmark probably will both go through. And Denmark could well go further than England. We don't know. Yeah, I get why some people are torn. I mean, I've got that relationship with Brentford. I go there every week, whereas I just don't see as many England games. Doesn't mean I don't support them, but it's just not the same as going week in, week out. But yeah, I'm English, and I want England to do well. I don't go into those games thinking I want Denmark to win. But I also did actually probably think it would be a draw, and it was.
It's always tight when we play Denmark. Always tight. Yeah. It's never clear cut on either side.
Yeah, and historically in our second group game, if you look back to the last Euros and the last World Cup, we always draw the second one, even if it's 0-0 against Scotland. We're always a bit underwhelmed at this stage of the tournament. So I don't think we should lose all hope yet, but obviously we do need to get better. Yeah,
for sure. Let's get on to England then. Where do we start? I think it might be useful to map out pre-tournament expectations before and after we knew the 26-man squad. Obviously, Southgate called up 33. He then ended up culling 7 of those. Maguire and Shaw both out. Shaw's travelled with the squad, but it's weird. He went from being a long shot to then potentially being available for the first game, to then being out for the Denmark game, to now being out what it looks like for the last game in the group stage. So, I mean, we could talk about that in a bit more detail. And I know people are kicking off about that in terms of, other left backs being left at home. Obviously, the big exclusions I thought were Rashford, Grealish, and obviously James Maddison, probably Maddison less so. But in terms of the stalwarts in Gareth Southgate's England and the ones that have featured him at major tournaments, Marcus Rashford was a big one. Jack Grealish was another big one. But how did you boys feel when you saw the 26-man squad? Craig, I'll come to you first.
I was more surprised with Grealish not going than I was with Rashford. I felt like Rashford has been quite underwhelming recently, just in the Premier League in general. But he, like Maguire, is one of those players that maybe doesn't light the world on fire with their club team, but when they play for England, you're going to get 110% out of them every single game. And that's just what Maguire and Rashford do every single time. Maguire was... Did he get left out because he was injured or what? Because that's injured, one that does... Yeah, I was going to say, because he has to have been injured, because that's the only reason I can see him not getting selected for England. And I feel like watching these first 2 games, that funny enough, he is the biggest miss more than any offensive player. Although, we kept a clean sheet against Serbia, and we have been... I feel like maybe the defence isn't the problem that we're having. We're performing defensively well, but making silly errors. Mark Gurhey, luckily, is quick enough to be able to recover from the errors that he makes, as is John Stones, Kyle Walker, and Trippier, all 4 of them. But Maguire's just that authoritative figure in defence and on the pitch when we play. Everything else, I'm not really surprised by, but yeah, maybe Grealish and Maguire, the only two that really caught me off guard was the fact that they haven't gone. But if Grealish goes, that means that one of those that are there don't. So who do you take him in place of that had a less not successful, but better season than what Grealish? Yes, Ivan. It has to be that. So I was getting that. Yeah, but I was going to say that isn't Ivan Toney, but it has to be Ivan Toney.
I think whilst we're there, and I do want to come back to what you thought when you saw the 26-man squad, but whilst we're there, the fact that Southgate brought on Watkins in the last game in place of Kane just makes me think that Ivan's not going to get any minutes anyway, regardless, unless Kane gets injured.
He's like that. He's like that mate. Ivan Toney to Gareth Southgate is like that mate that you know you're really good friends with. He's not fantastic at football, but you want him to be along with you. So you just take him along and hope for the best.
Yeah, it was telling. I don't think we're going to see Ivan Toney unless penalties or Kane gets injured. But we're going to talk about that in more depth anyway. Dan, what did you think when you saw the 26-man squad? Were you optimistic, pessimistic? Who was the key people out for you?
Well, Southgate will get criticised no matter what he does, because historically, obviously, he's kept in a lot of the experienced players like your Maguires, your Hendersons, and people like Rashford as well. And I think you need a balance. I think you need a mix of that experience and a mix of, those that are on form, those who've had good experience, those who've had good seasons. I think maybe he did take too many of them players out in one go. We are missing a lot of like those, leader type figures. And to an extent, it remains to be seen, because I haven't seen someone like Anthony Gordon on the left, and I'd like to see him play on the left. And obviously, he might fill the gap that Rashford and Grealish would otherwise fill. But we won't know until we see him. If we see him, Southgate doesn't like to make too many changes. I felt that we should have had a left-footed left back just in the squad, because it would help with the balance. Because at the moment, I don't think there's any solution apart from Trippier or Joe Gomez, who's equally right-footed and equally not really going to provide the width we need on the left-hand side, especially if you're playing Foden on the left. And Southgate must have known he was going to do that. Yeah. So we need some balance in the team. And even if it's like Tyreek Mitchell, he's very, unconvincing. He's not, you don't regard him as a top left back, but he'll be solid enough, and he'll have a relationship with Mark Gurhey, because obviously they play for Palace. And I just think that would just allow some more balance. And I think it's nice to just have that balance over just having all the best players fit in however you can fit them in sometimes.
I think, go on, you go.
No, I was just going to say then if you do leave out a couple of the better players, then if you have them to bring on in the second half, then even better.
Yeah, I think one of the main surprises to me was Jared Branthwaite not going, and maybe that noise has kind of gone away because of the performances of Mark Gay, who I think has actually been probably one of, if not England's best player in the first two opening games, and he's deputised for Harry Maguire really well. But to have Jared Branthwaite, who's your natural left footer, who's played with Jordan Pickford all season, who everyone rants and raves about, especially Everton fans, not on the plane, was just a bit odd. But he only played 14 minutes or something like that in the two previous call-ups that he'd got from Gareth Southgate. So it wasn't a massive surprise, but I just thought if you want that bit of balance, then you take Branthwaite. But you're right. I feel like the team is crying out for balance at the moment. I mean, don't actually think the defense has done that bad. I know Trippier is a sensible player, but you're not, like you said, Dan, going to get the overlap on the left-hand side, and Foden always wants to drift in the middle, which is, again, why I'm surprised that we haven't seen Anthony Gordon yet, because he is the one that would provide that width and work with Kane to the extent that maybe a Grealish or a Rashford would. But we just haven't seen it. But anyway, we're digressing because I do want to speak about this, but with a different light. First two performances, Craig. Serbia, I think everyone was kind of, wrapped up in the result, and I did kind of agree with it. It wasn't an amazing performance, but I think everyone was right in that you just want to get 3 points on the board in the first game, and the win is the most important thing. But I think it was the Denmark game that really worried people, and it's because you saw the patterns of England scoring first and then dropping deep. I think Sky Sports released a graphic the other day of England players' average positions after conceding the equaliser, after going 1-0 up against Denmark. And I'm pretty sure it would have been very similar to the Serbia heat maps as well. And just like this has been a pattern pre the Euros. Like we've seen this happening. If you want to argue that far back, you could go that far back to 2018. You could go back to the Italy 2020 final. God, I can't speak. But yeah, what were your thoughts post Denmark? Because I feel like that was there was just a lot of negativity swirling around after that game.
What I will say is when post Serbia, I know you said post Denmark, but post Serbia is if you can, and everyone's going, yeah, just win your first group game. But my thought is if you can play well and if you can play poorly and still come away from a game having won it, that's the sign of a good team. And everyone kind of agreed. A lot of people on Twitter said the same thing. Whereas if you play poorly and you still win, that's the sign of a good team. That's what like Man City do. That's what Arsenal do. That's what the big teams in the Premier League do. Liverpool do. They don't necessarily play to their best, but they still get the 3 points. Then you think, okay, we've had a bad performance against Serbia and we've won. Now we need to go into the Denmark game and just put on a performance as well. We said this so many times with Brentford throughout the season. The result doesn't necessarily matter to the point that we need to see the performance. I understand this is a tournament, so the results do matter. I understand that part as well. But to go out and you know, we were 1-0 up inside 10 minutes? And I don't think we even started well. I thought we got incredibly lucky with the goal because the defender wasn't looking over his shoulder properly. Kyle Walker's nipped around the outside. The cat's just pulling stuff over, so apologies. I don't know what she's doing out there. so I've really lost my train of thought now. Yeah, we started fantastically. Kyle Walker's lost his foot in. It's taken 2 deflections and fallen to Kane's, put it in the bottom corner. And as I don't know about you guys or everyone else that's watching, as soon as we went 1-0 up, I thought we need to concede now to be able to play again. Because as soon as we went 1-0 up and we went straight from kickoff, it felt like we just went backwards. That was it. We took kickoff and just stayed still. They took kickoff and that was it. Let them have the ball now. And I was talking to my dad watching the game and I said to him, we need to concede. Otherwise, this is just going to be the most boring game of football. It carried on being the most boring game of football anyway. But it's not. I would rather watch us go 1-0 down than go 1-0 up because it's just so boring otherwise. I would rather us have to chase the game and create opportunities for us to win it rather than us go 1-0 up early on, which we did, and try and sit back for 80 minutes defending the lead, which is what we did against Italy in the Euro final, in the last Euros. And it didn't work then. If it didn't work then, it's not going to work now, is it? Do you know what I mean? It was just the negative performance after going 1-0 up is dross football. It's terrible football. It's not entertaining. It's not fun to watch, and it's just boring.
Dan, what did you make of Denmark?
Well, I agree with much of what Craig said. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't matter as long as we turn things on at the right time in the tournament. And obviously, we will go through regardless of how bad we've been in the first 2 games. I think it highlights the problems. I think surely now Gareth Southgate has to see that changes are required. And, you know, even tactically, even just getting up the pitch. Preston, we've got such good players. We've got like the best front 6 at the tournament. Mm-hmm. And we just can't seem to keep the ball even. And it's crazy, really, given that the players we do have. And, you know, you wonder if the pressure is getting to them. I think Declan Rice has done an interview saying that they put in too much pressure on themselves because obviously it's probably the first tournament in the Southgate era where everyone's really gone into it thinking, oh, yes, we can win this. We should be one of the best teams here. Mm-hmm. And obviously, given that we haven't won anything for so long, it probably does weigh on them. But they all play for top clubs. They all play for, you know, City, Arsenal, you know, all Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, such top clubs, and they must be used to, you know, that kind of pressure, winning things and, you know, being successful. And for that group of players, you know, I still do have some hope that we can improve because we need to. And I think it probably also is where Southgate's flaws lie. I think he's done very, very well over the years in improving the public's perception and, you know, making it feel more positive to play for England again. But then maybe we are seeing, slightly tactically, he's not one of the elite when it comes to that.
I am still hopeful, though. I think you're right to point
Yeah.
that out. We do have great players, and we are going to get on to sort of post group stage. I know we're saying that we're going to progress, but we probably will go through, and then that's where it gets tough. That's where we can face the likes of France. But you don't want to see, like you mentioned, Craig, the game against France in Qatar in 2022. We played well after we went 1-0 down, and that's when we got the equaliser. And then when we got the equaliser, I know Kane misses the pen, but it was kind of, when we got the equaliser, then it kind of plateaued again. So it is like you mentioned. I'd rather be chasing a game as an England fan than be 1-0 up, because especially against the good teams, especially against the teams that have a chance of beating us, and I think that's what we saw against Denmark. Just on Southgate, there were comments made by him post Denmark about Calvin Phillips when he said that we don't have a natural replacement for Calvin Phillips. We've been trying to replace him for a while. So I just want to read out a tweet that I saw earlier today. Jay Daniel on Twitter said, that Phillips quote from Southgate is properly mental. Front six tonight had the best players from La Liga to the Premier League, the Bundesliga top scorer, and £100 million DM, and one of the best right wingers around. But you can't make it work without a guy who couldn't get in the West Ham 11. I feel sorry for Calvin Phillips, because he's not even on the plane and he's just been dragged into this debate for some reason. He must be seeing all these tweets and stuff. I feel sorry for him, but I think people do kind of forget that Calvin Phillips, especially at the last Euro, he was really important to the team. He won England Player of the Season, I'm pretty sure, that year. He was a big player for Southgate. And whilst I don't agree, he's not the caliber of player that you'd like. I think there were a lot of people that were confused about his call-up during the Euro 2020 campaign, and a lot more people that were frustrated by his place in the starting 11 throughout that tournament. But I feel like he definitely proved throughout that tournament that he was a very useful cog in that machine. But I don't like, he's not the caliber of player that England should be taking forward if we want to, win the next tournament, or win this tournament, or win the next World Cup. I think we've got better players than him now. But in terms of your point, Dan, just on Southgate's tactics, what did we make of this quote? Because I feel like it was just a bit wild. After a loss like that, Southgate's normally quite good at reading the room. I know that he can wind people up sometimes in his tactics, but in terms of being like a good PR man, and he knows the right thing to say at the right time, that was just the worst thing he possibly could have said. Do you know what I mean,
Yeah.
Craig?
Who do you want to talk? Because you said Dan.
I don't know. I said Dan and Craig. I was hoping one of you just picked up.
I don't mind. Well, I think Calvin Phillips is probably sitting at home thinking, this is all my fault. We're losing because it's all my fault. No, I think he's got to find a solution. I think we've got two young players in Mainu and Wharton who aren't being given the opportunity because Southgate probably doesn't trust them yet, probably doesn't think they're ready. But then if so, why are they then in the squad taking up places for other people? You've got to trust them, or they shouldn't be in the squad. Mm-hmm. And then also, I think Bellingham is intelligent enough to play there next to Rice. I don't for 1 second think Bellingham wouldn't be able to do a job in there over a right back who's converted into a midfielder.
We don't need. I've had this conversation with a few people about the way that England are lining up. We do not need two holding midfielders. We have got enough talent to play a single pivot in Declan Rice and two players further forwards. We absolutely have the talent in defence, and we absolutely have the talent in Declan Rice to be able to play a single pivot. Play like a how would you do it? A 4-1-4-1 essentially. But there is enough talent in Declan Rice. Those two players that would be in front of him being Jude, and then it could be Cole Palmer, it could be Phil Foden, it could be Trent for some reason if he feels necessary to play him. There is Eze as well, who I thought was really good when he came on against Denmark. People were I saw people saying, why is he coming on? I thought Eze did quite well, put himself about and won himself a few fouls. He made a difference when he came on. We've got 5-6 options in that central attacking midfield role that we do not need to play two holding midfielders. We have got a good enough team, a good enough defence. I know we've said about Maguire missing, we said about Shaw missing, other defenders. But we have got a good enough defence to be able to play a single pivot in front of them. That then gives us, 5 attacking players on the pitch. 5 attacking players on the pitch at a minimum. It's 4 defenders. You're holding midfielder. That front bit in front of the defender, defensive midfielder, but behind the striker, and let Harry Kane stay up there. Harry Kane is coming far too deep at the moment to try and make something happen. And normally, when that happens, Harry Kane drops deep and it pulls that central defender, one of the central defenders, out of the opposition, which gives then space for Phil Foden, who is not a winger. He's very clearly not a winger. He doesn't really do it for City, but his movement shows that he's not really a winger. He's a fantastic footballer, phenomenal player, absolutely phenomenal. But he doesn't have the movement of what a winger would have. Jack Grealish would have. Rashford would have.
Gordon.
I'm not saying it. Ollie Watkins, as a winger, had the exactly same thing. When Kane drops deep and he pulls that central defender out, that creates a huge gap in any team's defence. If we need to play Route 1 football to make things difficult for the opposition, just to change it up from the stuff that we're trying to do at the moment, do it. Let Kane drop deep and pull a defender out, and then the 2 wide players need to stay further up, because Kane dropping in creates the space for them to run into. We are not doing that at the moment. We have done that previously, but in the warm-up games and the 2 games that we've had so far, Kane is dropping so deep that everyone has to come up. So it's just not working at the moment. He needs to change it. And if he brought Ivan on, Ivan would stay that bit higher up, but then he'll pull them in a bit. Just creates that space. But we're not doing that at the moment for whatever reason.
I feel like the game that keeps getting referenced is that Spain game where we went 3-0 up in the first half, and you see Kane dropping deep and then Rashford and Sterling just going, and that's how we got the 3 goals in the first half, basically.
Yeah. But Southgate's cautious, isn't he? He's not going to go with. I don't think he's ever going to go with just one single. But at least you can release Rice.
I don't know.
Rice can go as well.
Yeah, absolutely he could. But is now this is so far fetched, incredibly far fetched. But is he using his player mind? And now keep in mind, Southgate was a defender.
Yeah.
Southgate was a defender. So what are we saying? And I kind of agree, but I don't agree. I feel like it's a bit far fetched, but also could be hitting the nail on the head. That when we go 1-0 up, he is seeing the game as a defender still. And he knows that we need to set up to be able to stop them from attacking the goal, keep the ball as far away from the goal as possible. But we know that for whatever reason, excluding the amount of talent that we've had, we can't do it. We just cannot. We cannot sit on a 1-goal lead. Can't sit on a 2-goal lead. We need to win 3 or 4-0 by what I'm seeing, by my viewing.
Yeah, I think that Southgate definitely sees it from a defender's point of view, and I think in tournament football as well, I feel like you can't win without a good defence. And to the defence's credit so far, I don't think they've been the issue. The one situation that I think Southgate does deserve criticism for, and maybe less so with the Foden problem and the Kane problem, is this Trent experiment in midfield. I think you're bang on, Dan. Why bring Mainu and Morton if you're not going to give him a go? I know he's tried with Trent now, but if he persists with Trent in the final group game and beyond, I feel like it just doesn't work. And what you were saying about a single pivot, Craig, in terms of having Declan Rice in that position, I was listening to Gary Neville the other day, and he pointed out that Declan Rice plays more as an 8 for Arsenal. And he was playing in that single pivot, but they brought in like the likes of Partey and Jorginho to play for that for Arsenal. And it turns out that Declan Rice can do that as well, which I think a lot of West Ham fans were saying before he signed for Arsenal, is that he's actually probably better as a box-to-box midfielder and someone that can arrive late and score from outside the box. So for me, and in terms of playing out from the back as well, if you do bring someone in, I think Trent hasn't worked. I think that experiment, if he continues with that, then he's going to come in for a big line of criticism. It just hasn't worked. And you need someone like a Wharton or a Manu who can take the ball off the back line and progress it. And maybe that gives Declan Rice a little bit more license to get forward and join in with the attack. But I feel like that's the area that I think Southgate probably deserves the most criticism for. And I think, I'm not sure if he had to try it. I think everyone was saying before the tournament started that we've got Trent in the team and he's like one of the most naturally talented footballers in England. And if you can get him in the team, let's try and do it. But I feel like now with, it's almost like he's tried to get all the good players in the team and then it's kind of amalgamated to what we've seen in the first 2 games, which is not very good. But I feel like the Foden problem, Dan, I'm yet to see anything from Phil Foden in England shirt that bears any sort of resemblance to the Man City Phil Foden. And I feel like that does a little bit of that have to come down to him. Obviously, I know he doesn't like playing off the left, but I saw Cesc Fabregas talking about how the good players demand the ball the way that Jude does. And I know Jude is playing in a different position, but it is a bit fluid. Like I've seen Jude on the left in the Denmark game. I've seen Foden in the middle. And granted, Foden was slightly better against Denmark than he was against Serbia, but I'm yet to see Man City Foden in an England shirt, and I feel like some of that has to come down to him. He's just not performing in the international games.
I thought he was actually a bit better in the second game against Denmark, but the thing is, all of his good work came when he received the ball in the middle, and obviously there was a gaping hole then at the left side of our attack, and because Kane comes deep, Foden comes inside, everyone wants to occupy that position just behind where Kane should be, and it just cramps everything up, and we just can't move the ball, where we'd like to move the ball. And it's easier to defend against if everyone wants to be in the same place. Obviously, I think he was better, but only when he received it in the middle. And obviously, he hit the post, he could have scored. I think he had another opportunity where he dragged it over. But again, both of those opportunities were where he picked it up in the middle, got on the half turn, and then obviously hit the post or put it over. I think he needs to play in that number 10. So then the question is whether you actually bench him and bring it on. He would be a great player to come on in the number 10 with 20 minutes to go. We don't need to always see him from the start. It's whether you bench him and keep Bellingham in the number 10, or it's whether you trust Bellingham to go into the space next to Rice. And Gareth Southgate's the best person to make a judgment on that. It wouldn't bother me too much if he did go with someone like Wharton, because I think Wharton's very tidy. He'll pick up the ball, he'll move it along, and he'll allow Rice to push forward, perhaps more than Rice would be pushing forward if it was Bellingham next to him.
Yeah.
And that would allow him to play his Arsenal role, and obviously you then have Foden off the bench. I think someone else needs to be on the left. And I think this Slovenia game is the best time to try it now, because we're through. We're going to go through in some form, even if the Slovenia game goes terribly for us. So it's a great time to try Wharton. It's a great time to try Anthony Gordon on the left, who I think is profile-wise is more like, the successful left wingers we've had in the past, like Sterling at tournaments. He can do that role, and it will just have more structure. We want someone on the left to do what Saka does on the right, because I think Saka's actually been one of our better players in the first two games.
Bang on. I think for sure. I'm really surprised that we haven't seen Gordon yet, but you're right in that this Slovenia game is the perfect opportunity to change it from what we've been doing. I'd start with a different midfielder instead of Trent, because I don't think that's the answer, especially against the better team. So he will get hurt. And also to see Gordon. I think, and I know you're grimacing, Craig, but I think Gordon, after the season he had for Newcastle, player of the tournament in the under 21 Euros, he is a very, very good player, and he is more like Sterling, more like Rashford, and he is someone that will offer the width when Kane drops deep. So I think it's Slovenia. It'd be interesting to see how he goes out. I know that they've been talking about in the camp about how they try and shut out the noise, but it must just be fucking impossible. When we're at the Euros, like anyone is talking about is England, especially on your social media. So to be able to ignore the noise, and ignore the calls for certain players to come in, especially after how poorly the first two games went in the grand scheme of things, it would be difficult. Are we surprised we've not seen Cole Palmer yet, Craig?
Yeah, he's one that, he had a fantastic season at Chelsea, and we know what he's capable of, but I don't know if maybe he's seeing him in the same light as he is seeing Ivan Toney, that he's just that penalty taker. So should we ever get to that stage of the tournament where someone is needed for a penalty, then we might see him. But he's one of those other players that could play in that central position instead of Trent. Absolutely, he could. But I don't know. Southgate seems blinded by something in what Trent does. Trent is a failed right back and a failed midfielder, so he's working his way up the pitch, and he'll be a failed forward soon enough as well. So
that's harsh.
It is. I mean, he's not a fantastic defender. Let's be honest. And from what we're seeing, he's not really a fantastic midfielder. so he's working his way forwards. Oh, bloody cat's making a racket out there. Sorry, guys. He's not doing a phenomenal job at the moment. Cole Palmer, Kobe Mainu, Wharton. We've got what's the word I'm looking for? So many options in the midfield. So many options in midfield, and he's blinded by something in Trent.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'd like to see some of these players very soon. I think the Slovenia game is a perfect, especially because Cole Palmer played in the first 2 warm-up games as well, and I thought he was actually probably one of the more impressive players, despite.
Is he not best at number 10 though as well? And it's then, do you have him, Foden, or Bellingham? I don't want Gareth Southgate to just shoehorn players in like we've seen with Foden, and then we'll probably all be like, "Oh, Cole Palmer's not being that effective. I wonder why." It's because he's not in that number 10, and obviously it's whether you trust Bellingham to play next to Rice, and then obviously Foden or Palmer can play then.
I think he should trust Bellingham though. Like, we've seen nothing from Bellingham to suggest that he couldn't play that role next to Rice adeptly, like he's played every other position. Like, if we're going to move,
he played deeper than he does now for Real.
Exactly. So Bellingham, like, build a team around Bellingham, let him play where he wants. He's got the discipline. Like, even against Serbia, he was playing as a number 10, but his heat map was insane. Like, he was everywhere on the pitch.
He was coming very deep. Yeah, he was coming very deep.
So, I think if we're going to put Foden in the 10 or Cole Palmer in the 10 and then push someone else out to the left, it will be because Bellingham has dropped into that midfield. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Cole Palmer as a substitute and then he kind of came on as a sub and really impressed, and then maybe had his position kind of locked down for the rest of the tournament. I do want to speak about the pressing problems, but I'm cautious with the time. But I think the pressing problems do kind of relate to, we start really well by pressing really high, and then we go 1-0 up, and then we drop the press for some reason. But
it's got to come from the manager, and they've got to go as a team, because if one player just decides they're going to go, that's not how a press works. The whole team has to press, otherwise it's so easy to play through.
But the thing is, we did it a couple of times, like in the opening sort of 20 minutes against Denmark, and we won the ball back, and then we scored, and then we just stopped. Like, it just stopped.
It needs to be more often, and that comes from the manager.
Yeah. Overall conversation about Southgate. Are all of these problems Southgate-related problems? I saw a tweet that was suggesting that, when England players aren't doing well or not performing at their level, like the likes of Harry Kane, you could argue this tournament, Phil Foden, Trent Alexander-Arnold, it always comes down to Southgate is got it tactically wrong, or are we cutting Southgate any kind of slack? I'm sort of on the fence with it, because I feel like there have been instances in the past with England, especially in the major tournaments, where Southgate has been reactive as opposed to proactive. I mean, the Italy final is the big one for me in terms of the shots on target that we had post going 1-0 up. Changes needed to be made, and we needed to get on the front foot, but we just didn't seem to do that. But are all of these problems Southgate related, Dan?
I think, first of all, we've got to remember international football is different to club football. They're not going to ever appear as cohesive, I think, as a club team, because the nature of it is they're together 3-4 times a year. He doesn't get to spend as much time with them. I think it's completely the wrong time to try this Trent thing when he doesn't play in midfield for Liverpool. And now you're trying it at a major tournament when he's barely played there for England either. I know he's played a few games, but not many. I think it's the wrong time to try things like that. I think you've got to have a clear system, and everyone needs to know what they're doing. But I do agree that in game, he doesn't necessarily react to what's happening, and you need to react to what's happening. You need to have a second plan. If we're 1-0 down, this is what we do. If, we're winning, but we're now under pressure, this is what we do. There needs to be some kind of plan there. I think he needs to try and accommodate more people in their roles that they play at their club, because they are accustomed to doing that every day, and we can do it. And there's absolutely no harm in having someone like Foden on the bench if we need to have him on the bench, because that is actually a very good thing, to be able to bring someone like him on with 20 minutes to go when the opposition have tired legs. What more can you want? We've got such good options. And I think he just needs to go back to basics a bit, just put more players back in their natural positions, get higher up, press as a team, be a bit braver. I know he finds that hard to do, but even if he wants someone like Wharton next to Rice, I don't mind that necessarily, if that makes him feel more comfortable as a team, if that makes him feel more solid. But you can still get up the pitch. You can still control the ball a bit more, as we should be doing now, because we don't have the team he inherited in 2018 now. It's a much better team than the first one he came in and inherited. So the expectation is high, and that's a difference in this tournament. And he's got to adapt to that now, and the whole team have to accept that, that pressure is going to be there because of how well they've all done.
Panic stations, Craig. Where are you with it? Are you panicking yet?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Just to build on what Dan said, I would also say that some of the responsibility has to fall on the players. Because if you cannot get yourself hyped up to represent your country at a big, European tournament like this, then you shouldn't be involved. That if you can't get yourself into that mindset to be able to go out there and perform to your maximum for your national team at a tournament like this, then you shouldn't be involved. So that's my viewpoint on that. But Southgate has to take responsibility for the players that he is playing, and when they are not performing, he has to then change things, which he hasn't done. So where I'm holding him accountable for that is the fact that he is allowing this to continue to happen for the 2 games. Panic stations, absolutely not. We've got this one game coming up, Slovenia, and we're looking at it as one of those games for which we should be winning. We looked at the Serbia game and said we should be winning that one, which we did. Wasn't necessarily very comfortable. We didn't perform fantastically, but we still won that game, which is what you expect to do as a good team. Grind out the results, which we did then. It's an opportunity. It's a brilliant opportunity for Southgate to actually mix things up a little bit. There's very specific things that need to happen for us to not qualify for this group, and I don't see Denmark losing to Serbia in this as well. I see Denmark winning it. There is a possibility in which we finish second still, obviously, but it's an opportunity. It's a fantastic opportunity in a huge international tournament for Southgate to experiment. He will not get this chance very often to be able to play not a mix and match, but maybe a not full strength team. Bring in Wharton, bring in Eze, bring in all of these players that we've spoken about, the player from Newcastle, bring in others. That it's a brilliant opportunity which he won't get very often at major tournaments. He needs to take it. I
think especially if we finish first in the group, I think we get one of the best third place teams from. Yeah. So that would be. I think if we finish second, then Germany. I think it might be panic stations. Like if we don't get a result, and then
we Germany
then we get Germany, who have looked pretty amazing the whole tournament. So yeah, I feel like the result against Slovenia, and I feel like we will get a result if he makes the changes that we're talking about. I think Trent needs to probably vacate midfield. I think that's the main one. And we'd also
I think it's not unheard of to start a competition badly and still end up winning. Like Argentina lost to Saudi Arabia in the first game of the World Cup, and they went on to win the World Cup.
Well, obviously, when Portugal won the Euros in 2016, they won one game within 90 minutes. Yeah. They won one game in 90 minutes.
Yeah,
so they drew all 3 group stage games. They then won on penalties against, I think it was Croatia. Then they beat someone in extra time. Then they beat Wales 2-0 in the semi-final, and then beat France in extra time. They didn't win more than one game in 90 minutes for that, and they won the whole competition. And like you
can imagine that if we do that, can't you? All the criticism still at Southgate. Yeah, we won it, but we didn't beat anyone good. We drew all our games.
Yeah, Southgate's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. But anyway, I think that's a positive note to end on. Not panic stations yet. We've got the game against Slovenia. We've got potentially a pretty favourable round of 16 draw as well. So whisper it quietly, boys. But I still do think it's coming home. The Ian Rowe podcast will be back for a podcast post the group stage as we look ahead to the round of 16 draw, and I'd imagine we'll probably do an episode after every game. I say that confidently. Sense of entitlement as an England fan after every game, but I feel like at least we probably have 2 more podcasts. I'd say at least. We do expect to beat Slovenia. We probably expect to get past the round of 16 as well. I'm really grimacing as I'm saying this, but if we get the favourable draws, I don't think anyone could gripe me for saying that we'd get past a best third place team. So yeah, we'll probably have 2 more podcasts at least, and then we might carry on potentially pretending who else is, depending on who else is still in the draw at that point. We might have one just recapping the whole Euros as well before we get on to some special episodes. So, boys, it's been a pleasure. Just before we go, guys, remember to subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels. Drop a comment down below if you disagree or if you agree with anything that we've said. Does Southgate deserve the criticism? Who would you like to see in the next game? All of that stuff, let us know in the comments down below. And also remember to give us a follow on the socials as at the Eden Road on Twitter and at Eden Road Pod on Instagram. Craig, Dan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
These players at the Euros.
Up the England.